At this point, we turn to a jazz musician who could be considered to be the most influential of them all because of his leading role in so many different genres: bebop, cool jazz, hard bop, third stream, modal, avant-garde or free, jazz rock fusion, and pop and funk. I'm talking, of course, about Miles Dewey Davis, who was born in 1926, about the time when Louis Armstrong was forming his Hot Five, and remained an active and transformative musician nearly to the end of his life in 1991. It certainly would be hard to point to another musician whose musical direction took more twists and turns. Miles seemed to have been born with an insatiable need to change and evolve. This quote from the opening of a biography on milesdavis.com sums it up nicely. Miles Davis made music that grew from an uncanny talent to hear the future and a headstrong desire to play it. Rolling Stone magazine put it this way: Miles Davis played a crucial role in every major development in jazz since the mid-1940s, and no other jazz musician has had so profound an effect on rock. He was the most widely recognized jazz musician of his era, an outspoken social critic, and an arbiter of style, in attitude and fashion as well as music. Speaking of fashion and magazines, Esquire rated Miles as one of the top 75 best-dressed men of all time. At least one book has been devoted solely to that aspect of his influence. Here we see Miles with his third wife, the actress Cicely Tyson. The two of them were a celebrity couple, married from 1981 to 1988. It's a distressing fact that Miles Davis was admittedly and unrepentantly abusive to the women in his life. I won't venture into the discussion of to what degree an artist's personal flaws impact on the impression of their art, but I don't think we can let this aspect of Miles' legacy pass without mention. When you watch interviews, you can often sense nervousness on the part of the interviewer, knowing that if Miles didn't take a liking to you, there'd be no doubt of that fact. Here's talk show host Dick Cavett in 1986, the year that Miles' album Tutu came out.
His music and the groups he's led have changed jazz at least 5 times. But his influence extends beyond music. He affects clothing styles, fashion, the way people speak, their attitudes toward themselves and the world, the way they stand, the way they hold a drink, everything. Some people go to his concerts not to listen to the music, but to see what he has on, the way he's standing that night on stage, the style in which he's carrying himself. This is not to say that that's all he is. I think it's genuinely and generally acknowledged that he's a genius in the musical field. Cosby said that as a kid in Philadelphia, if you didn't have the latest Miles Davis record, you were no one. He's a master of his art, a very interesting and complex man. I'm pleased to have him here, and I sense his irritation at my introduction going on and on. Will you welcome, please, ladies and gentlemen, the great Miles Davis. Right out. They told me you were going to be mellow and you were going to make fun of my height.
No.
Will you speak with me when we come back?
Yeah.
Thank God, I almost wore those same clothes. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Miles' influence can surely be seen in the number of musicians who played in his band before becoming enormously significant in their own right, including John Coltrane, Bill Evans, Herbie Hancock, Wayne Shorter, John McLaughlin, and many others, as you can see here. Although it's notable and regrettable that only men are represented on this list, it's worth noting that there are black and white musicians represented. Miles was forcefully outspoken about racism, but he was equally forceful in his declaration that skin color had no bearing on his assessment of a musician's ability or a person's worth. In a 1962 interview with Alex Haley, Miles responded to a question about race in this way: "When I say that some of my best friends are white, I sure ain't lying. The only white people I don't like are the prejudiced white people. Those the shoe don't fit, well, they don't wear it." Miles Davis grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. His father was a very successful dentist, and Miles said he didn't want for money as he grew up. As a teenager, he sat in with Billy Eckstine's band when they came through St. Louis, and as we've talked about, that band contained Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. In 1944, Miles moved to New York to attend the Juilliard School of Music. Now, that plan was primarily to satisfy his parents, and he didn't stay there very long, since his real motive was to get with Bird and the other leaders of a musical revolution. From the outset, Miles had his eye on the horizon. As we've talked about previously, Miles played on Bird's first record in 1945. Dizzy Gillespie played the more complex bebop tunes because Miles didn't have those kind of chops. Listening to his solo on Now's the Time, you can hear that Miles was already charting a different path than the other beboppers, one which played to his ability as a trumpet player, but also led him to choose unexpected chord tones that worked because of the strength of his melodic line. Throughout his career, Miles surprised the listener with what he chose to play and with what he chose not to play. An interesting historical artifact is found on Miles' 1958 record, Milestones. At the end of his solo on Straight No Chaser, pianist Red Garland uses Miles' solo from a decade before as the basis for his signature block chord style. It's uncertain whether this was a tribute or a protest on Red's part and whether or not Miles approved, but it's fascinating that he did it. Miles Davis arrived in New York at the time that bebop was the new thing, and he continued to play with Bird in the late 1940s. But he was drawn toward a group of musicians who were already looking to take the music beyond bebop. A central figure in that scene was the arranger-composer Gil Evans. Miles and Gil wound up becoming close friends and musical collaborators. Gil Evans was born in Toronto in 1912, which made him 14 years older than Miles. His father was a miner who traveled in search of work, eventually ending up in California, where Gil went to school. In the 1940s, Gil worked as an arranger for the Claude Thornhill Band. Thornhill's was a dance band during the big band era, but the arrangements went beyond the typical dance band style, incorporating elements of impressionistic classical music and non-traditional instruments like tuba and French horn, which were hallmarks of what became known as third stream. Saxophonists Lee Konitz and Jerry Mulligan were also in that band. Gil moved to New York in 1946, 2 years after Miles. His apartment became a hang spot for musicians who were looking for new musical directions. In this picture, we see Miles and Lee Konitz. From the musicians who hung out at Gil's apartment, Miles formed a new group in 1948. He was attracted to the dense harmonies and tonalities of the Thornhill Band, but wanted a more manageable size. They settled on a 9-piece instrumentation, which Gil said was the smallest number of instruments that could still express all the harmonies the Thornhill Band used. Pete Rigelow from Capitol Records produced recordings of what was known as the Miles Davis Nonette in 3 sessions that spanned a year and a half. The musicians varied, with only Miles, Jerry Mulligan, Lee Konitz, and Bill Barber playing on all 3 sessions. The arrangements came from Gil Evans, Jerry Mulligan, John Lewis, and Johnny Carisi. There are also live recordings of the band from a gig at the Royal Roost, also known as the Metropolitan Bopera House. The Nonette was booked to open for Count Basie, who said of the group, "Those slow things sounded strange and good. I didn't always know what they were doing, but I listened, and I liked it." At the time of their first release, the Miles Davis Nonette recordings didn't attract much attention. But in 1957, when Miles was emerging as a star and jazz had branched out in new directions, Capitol re-released the recordings, titled as Birth of the Cool. After the fact, This established Miles as having been on the vanguard of both third stream and cool jazz, and it led to further historical collaborations with Gil Evans, which I'll talk about soon. While some of the tunes on the record were closer to bebop in style, others reflected the impressionistic influence. Gil referred to the soft dynamics as underblowing, and Miles said he wanted the instruments to sound like voices. I think you can hear both in the tune Moonbeams. This was recorded on the third and final session in March of 1950.